So, I like Japanese games more than Western games. I think overall they're more polished, refined, and maybe most importantly, varied in their gameplay, that I personally get more enjoyment out of them than a typical Western release. However, one trend that I've noticed cropping up in this past decade across many different Japanese series, and one that's been a part of the Western market for a while now, is the inclusion of a player avatar. These are self-insert characters that are typically mute, and the player is supposed to project their personality onto them, usually via a list of 2 or 3 dialogue choices that differentiate between nice, neutral, and dickish. These characters are fucking everywhere but Final Fantasy at this point, and while some franchises have had them for years, others are newer to the scene. This needs to stop. Avatar characters are the single worst thing you could put into your game in terms of narrative. Just make a compelling main character. People can empathize and project onto practically anyone and anything as long as they're relatable and or interesting. Avatar characters are not necessary, don't improve the product, and in fact the opposite. They can do nothing but damage the product you're trying to make. Let's get into why, shall we? So first off, yes, I think they suck in Western games too. This isn't a case of the Japanese trying and failing to copy the West's trends like we saw happen with something like Final Fantasy 15. In fact, some examples are even worse than the ones I'm about to lay out here, like the player character in Fallout 4, for example. Like, what the hell were they thinking? No, they're awful everywhere, I just happen to care about Japanese IPs more. So, we're going to start with the Monster Hunter series because it's what I've been playing after Monster Hunter Rise was announced. The player character in every Monster Hunter game is a blank slate. As typical of avatars, they don't speak and have a very generic go-getter type personality. They also have no discernible motivation for becoming a hunter. That's left for the player to imagine. For most Monster Hunter games, this is fine, I guess. Obviously, one would prefer a good character where the player stands, but many entries in the series have only the barest of justifications for you to go out and hunt monsters, so the lack of depth doesn't really harm the product. This is the best case scenario, I promise. Jumping ahead to Monster Hunter World, however, and we have a different story. Literally. Now, our character has a backstory and a motivation. 2 strikes out, and the third for teaming up with this idiot over here. If this entity is supposed to be an avatar for the player, then why do they have a past at all? Doesn't that take away from the whole self-insert thing? Yes, it does, which is a problem if that's their goal. Of course, if a character has a past and a motivation, that being that they were a hunter in the old world, and they came to the new world to study the Elder Crossing because science? The game never really explains said motivation, but there logically must be one to justify why the hunter came to the new world. Unless it was a thing like slavery by the Research Commission, which would be an awesome bit of world building, and would open up for a spin-off, Monster Hunter Revolution, but I digress. Anyway, due to these 2 factors, the hunter is now a character, but fails as such because they're emotionless save for the generic gestures that they all do in every game. Not to mention, the cutscenes depict the hunter as some kind of Neo figure, doing these crazy and oftentimes impossible and always improbable feats to whatever monster they're facing, all while protecting the handler and somehow doing no in-game damage to the monster's health in the process. Of course. This disconnect between what the player character can do in-game versus in cutscenes is prevalent in a lot of games, sure, but when that disconnect makes for the most interesting topic about your character, then that's a real problem. There's also the issue of the avatar's intelligence. In most Western RPGs, intelligence is a stat that can be increased to allow for speech options or maybe used in a stat check to solve some puzzle or something like that. The hunter in World is just good at everything research related, because that's something the player can project onto. They gain points in researching a specific monster by finding tracks or droppings of some kind, and if you build up enough, then your scout flies can track it. As well, even if you don't use that element on a monster, if your hunter gains enough research points, they can somehow know a monster's elemental weakness and such somehow. Your hunter is also an expert topographer, unless your map fills in via magic whenever you enter a new area. Like, what else is the hand-drawn map and research book supposed to imply? This isn't a problem in earlier games because you had to buy that information in books written by other people that have brains, or get a map from the starting chest, as an example. Whereas your hunter is depicted as a silent killing machine. Most of these issues crop up because World, more than any other entry in the series, is cinematic at various points, and actually tries to have a story, in the continual research and revelations about the Elder Crossing and the Nergigante and such, where your hunter is not only an active participant in said research, but the frontman for the entire operation. You, as the player, discover every aspect of the plot on your own. No one else does a damn thing, even if the game tries to make it seem like they do. So either the handler has telepathy and can see through your head, which is likely considering how off-putting she already is, or your hunter is a god of research. Oh, and they of course have to talk, because how else would they convey information? Writing? Please, there's not even a writing animation in the whole game. While I wouldn't call it good, Monster Hunter 4 and 4 Ultimate pulled this off the best in my opinion. Your hunter was implied to be a prodigy, which isn't great if you're trying to do the whole self-insert thing, but it's fine considering the loop of the game is fighting progressively tougher monsters over and over again to get loot, some of which are canonically city levelers. As well, the hunter is surrounded by actual characters, though they're still very simple, and plays a part in the overall team. The Caravaneer is the speaker and the thinker of the group, whereas the hunter is the fieldman and the muscle, of which the player avatar archetype can function, okay, not well, but serviceably. It even justifies itself decently in the final battle against the Shagaru Magala, the god of which you have clawed your way into becoming its godslayer. Meanwhile, the Nergigantes or Magdaros and all the other Elder Dragons were essentially beat up by a bunch of book nerds. Okay, Sight, you say, but Monster Hunter games have no story, and you even said that it was fine at the beginning, so what gives? Fair enough. While I think that the Monster Hunter series would benefit immensely from a fleshing out of the story, characters, and world, no pun intended, I will concede that that isn't the main appeal of the franchise, but it arguably is the main focus of the Fire Emblem franchise, or at least is much more of a priority. Fucking dog. Technically, Awakening and Fate's avatars don't actually fit my criteria, and that's because they're not avatars. They're actual characters that happen to let you customize their appearance. They much more easily slip into the equally awful self-insert archetype. Characters with very generic personalities for their settings, often with wish fulfillment and immense power and importance to the plot, no matter how improbable. As characters, both Robin and Corrin suck ass. I think Robin is better owing to the fact that they aren't annoying, but this kind of thing isn't the proper solution to the problem of avatars not having a character. The purest version of a playable avatar joined in recently with the release of Fire Emblem Three Houses. Now, Three Houses is a fantastic game, but my god, its story was utter dog shit. Most of that was because the bulk of the narrative tension and emotional weight relied on either repeat playthroughs or, more relevantly to the topic, Byleth. Byleth is the textbook example of everything wrong with the avatar character. They don't speak, they don't react very much, they don't show emotion, except they do. They do all of these things, but only in cutscenes. Fucking oops. They cry for Geralt, because of course anyone would cry if their loving father was murdered in front of them. They get angry and yell when they perform a critical hit. They also speak through the dialogue choices, which are absolutely useless in this game because they don't end up doing anything of import. Reacting comes into play with the shows of emotion in cutscenes, and they also smile or frown according to the situation too. And yet, despite these obvious signs of, a character, Byleth is anything but. You can't project yourself onto Byleth the same way you could with someone like the Hunter because they have a past. Byleth is a mercenary of renown, at least some of it, even having the title of the Ashen Demon. And they're a part of the most famous mercenary band in Fodlan, the Bladebreakers, under their father. They also are required to do things in the story that the player wouldn't know how to do, and Byleth wouldn't logically know how to do either. Teach. Teaching is a delicate art between instruction, failure, success, and reward. Apparently Byleth can do that with their mercenary upbringing, where they were probably surrounded by thugs wanting to make money, and where they rarely, if ever, probably meaningfully interacted with the outside world, save for getting their jobs from them. Byleth doesn't justify anything about their avatar-like traits either. They're mutes, because of course they are. They have voice actors, though, because they have crit quotes, but in cutscene conversations, they're effectively a silent protagonist. They don't show emotions in-game because their heart doesn't beat. I'm not joking about that, by the way. I can understand if they wanted to make something of an autistic character, like they were emotionally stunted or odd as a child and didn't grow up like a normal kid would, and was therefore able to impart new, unusual, but often sagely advice to their students due to the unique way they think and feel about things. But of course that would require actual writing. Byleth was most certainly thought up as a player projection first and a character second, which is absolutely hilarious to think about, considering the game gives them multiple character arcs depending on which route you take. So they fail as an avatar because they have a discernible past, motivation, skill set, etc., and they fail as a character because they're given the most bare-bones skeleton of an actual character to keep the player avatar fantasy alive, even though it was dead the second they were given a father that was destined to die. God, Byleth is so terrible. Even Corrin, one of the worst characters ever in the whole series, is better than Byleth, because at least I can feel something about them. Sure, how I feel is annoyed, bordering on pissed off even, but that's better than nothing. Oh, but Sight, there are way more characters in Fire Emblem, and they're all great, and they have support conversations with each other, so that makes up for it enough to where you shouldn't whine like a little bitch about a stupid avatar. Fair enough. Most Fire Emblem casts are excellent, though the presentation of their characters has always been subpar at best due to the lackluster support system in every game. But what about a game that's highly story-driven, where all of the depth from all the characters comes in due to their relation to the main character? Yeah, it's time to talk about Persona. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, know that I'm only going to be talking about Personas 3 through 5, the baby ones that everyone plays, because I'm a baby that's only played them. I have confirmed that at least most of the rest of the larger Megami Tensei franchise uses silent protagonist, but I'm not going to cast judgment on them all unless I know for sure. So, Persona. Not great. Okay, that's a lie. All 3 of the games I'm about to bitch about are some of my favorites, and all of them have their place in my heart, though one of them, it might be in the place reserved for Hellspawn. But I mean, it really doesn't matter about this problem anyway, because the only thing Persona is good for is deciding who is best girl. And it's obviously Rise. In any case, all 3 games have the same problem, the stupid avatar protagonist, and just like the other problem children, they fail as such, even if it was a good idea, which, of course, it isn't. All 3 of them have backstories that are immensely important to the plot, though that's not as prevalent with 4, and all of them have a very defined personality, especially if we're looking outside of the main games and into spin-offs or adaptations, though it gets muddy if you do that too. Persona 3 is depressed and introverted, essentially not caring if he dies fighting demons. Yu Narukami, or Persona 4, is kind of witty, sarcastic, has an extroverted personality who gets along well with others. Joker, or Persona 5, is another extrovert and a troublemaker at heart who despises living in a world where others decide his fate for him. If they wanted to, they could make very interesting and well-fleshed-out characters from these baselines, and adaptations like the Persona 4 anime have done exactly that, but...
Oh, fuck, here we go again.
The Persona protagonists have more agency than someone like Byleth because their choices do matter, but not in any meaningful way. There isn't a karma system that would provide benefits to all methods of play. No, your choices boil down to, do I want this character to like me, and thus give me shit, or do I want to be an asshole and have them not like me, making me work much harder to get them to give me shit? Obviously, you're going to choose the former. Because there are right answers to almost every question asked of the player in Persona, the protagonists aren't able to be molded into what the player wants unless they sacrifice efficiency. And that's not even to mention the story-related cutscenes that have absolutely no bearing except for changing 1 or 2 lines of dialogue before the scene plays out like it would anyway. There is zero benefit to playing the asshole. You are punished. What kind of role-playing game is that? Sure, you're playing a role, but the point of role-playing games is the ability to freely choose that role. This isn't even to mention the protagonists themselves. While I listed their baselines, you might be thinking that they get better as the game goes on, but you'd be wrong. Of course, they don't speak. That automatically limits their expressiveness and ability to react to situations like a normal human being would. They also don't discernibly change. They are essentially the same character with no differences between where they start and where they end. The core of the emotional endings, all of which have the protagonist somehow separated from the main party, is only emotional because you like those people and want to hang out with them more. Well, you're supposed to like them anyway. Alright, from here, let's zoom out a bit. I've outlined why these 3 specific examples of avatar characters and franchises don't work. I've listed commonalities as to why, but now we need to figure out why having an avatar protagonist is bad in and of itself. Well, to do that, we're going to go to a kiddie game. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Time, Darkness, or Sky. In this game, you play a human who is caught in a storm along with their partner, and wash up on shore in amnesiac, only remembering that they were in fact a human. Thus, they are understandably shocked that they're now a Pokemon. This protagonist is also technically silent, but what differentiates them from these other pieces of shit is twofold. First, the player isn't given dialogue options aside from yes and no to enter shops and things like that, so you don't choose what this character's supposed personality is, which gives the writers room to flesh them out. As well, they aren't actually silent, at least not in the storytelling sense. Not only do they have a whole one conversation with their partner after you beat the final boss, but more importantly, most cutscenes are filled with an inner monologue of the player character thinking to themselves and relaying their feelings about a given situation. Due to this, we understand that the player character is kind, level-headed, but initially reluctant to help others before helping himself, as shown when he hesitates teaming up with the partner Pokemon when their precious item is stolen at the beginning. Because of this monologue and the actions that the player character makes all on their own, by the way, such as acting immediately when they learn of Drowsy's deception, or their fearlessness and encouragement of their cowardly but well-intentioned partner throughout the game, it isn't necessarily out of left field when you meet someone like Grovyle, who was the the player character's partner before they lost their memory, and speaks highly of the player character. He doesn't say anything revolutionary about them, but he does reinforce the idea that yes, the player character is a good person who would risk their life to protect the natural balance of the world, and to help anyone they find along the way. We see the player character be confused, we see them scared, determined, angry, and even content at the end. Because the writers didn't throw in a shitty avatar that the player was supposed to project onto, they were able to have actual pathos at the end. For spoilery reasons, the player character has to disappear from existence after you beat the final boss, and they have a tearful farewell with their partner, thanking them for being such a good friend and sticking by them through it all. This game, to me, demonstrates exactly why games should not have avatar characters. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is not a complex story, but it's still well told, especially for its target audience, and it is a great introduction into storytelling fundamentals. I'd actually like to do a full story analysis of it someday, but for now, we have to get back to the topic at hand. The ultimate question of should I include this, or this element into my story is whether or not the thing in question would improve it. I think you'd have to present to me a very strong and arguably controversial case to convince me that including these avatars benefited the games they were in. Many people say the Persona 4 anime was a really good adaptation of the game, and some even call it an improvement due to fleshing out Yu Narukami as a character. The Monster Hunter universe is ripe with storytelling potential. I'm reading a fanfic right now called The Lost Civilization that's executing it expertly, save for some prose issues because it's fanfiction. I don't think it's a very unpopular opinion to say that Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia had the best story in the series, if we're looking at releases post-Awakening, though many would say only the Tellius duology and genealogy of the Holy War stand a chance even then. Echoes didn't have an avatar. It had two proper main characters in Alm and Celica, and they were both fantastic. In my opinion, the best lords in the series by a pretty wide margin. All of these worlds and writers have the potential to write great characters, but they consistently choose not to, at least for the main character that we're supposed to care about the most. Why is that? My guess is that it's to try and appeal to a wider audience. For whatever stupid reason, modern audiences tend to have more difficulty relating to characters. I blame the hyperfocus on identity in today's political and cultural landscape, but I could be way off the mark there, so we'll not get into that. In any case, most people don't have the wherewithal or emotional maturity to relate to and understand people that don't look or act like them. So as a response, more developers are trying to make these blank slates for players to project themselves onto. Is this the right decision? Arguably yes, if you're looking at pure profit. But if you're looking at these products as art, or maybe less contentiously as stories, then the answer is a resounding no. Avatar characters, by their very nature, can't have a character arc. By their very nature, they can't react to things unless through a chosen prompt. By their very nature, can't be a real character in the story, or the fantasy is broken. I don't know about all of you, but I can project and relate much more to someone like Edward Kenway, Titus, Nathan Drake, and Cal Kestis than I can to any of these emotionless blobs that say they have a personality, but don't have anything that I can latch onto that means something. Thank you for watching. Until the end, my friends.